We're back. Power to us, guys. For those who watched the last video, please don't be offended. I mentioned a cow being squeezed out of milk. It's fine. People have done that for thousands of years. But as for this video, all of us excited. A concentration, a conversation that expands is a conversation that solidifies something. I'm assuming anytime somebody's having a conversation, they're trying to get to a point. Now, getting to a point is, well, getting to a point, I think, is an interesting thing to kind of like mention right now. Because most times, a conversation truly is discussing that point, not making a point, but discussing a point. So a conversation, I'm assuming, whatever I assumed earlier is not really like something that's worth assumption, is worth an assumption. Because like instantly like changed my mind or kind of like realized that saying that out loud didn't really make sense. So a conversation is discussing a point unless I'm debating or kind of like convincing or something like this. Or can we use negotiation? No, I'm not going to use negotiation. So, but the note of today is basically conversation that expands is a conversation that solidifies something. And I, the reason I probably wrote this is because at one point I realized that when you're learning, you're kind of like expanding on the point or approaching it from different perspectives. And reflecting on a scenario where I had a conversation at some point. Here we go. Anytime we're talking, there's something to talk about. Though most conversations kind of like shift from one topic to the other. I'm not gonna judge them. Some of them are like necessary for us to kind of like before you put water on your floor and actually wipe it, you have to like use the broom in order to sweep the dust. And I think that's like the fair like I don't know if they call them social conversations, which is kind of like the smaller conversations that you know, how's the weather, or like you know, oh, hot days today, or just kind of like, do you believe what's going on this, or did you hear about this news? Right, like I think these conversations are kind of like the gateway to kind of like exploring the touchy points or where we relate to other people. But I don't genuinely believe they're conversations. I think they're referred to as small talks. Small talk. There's not really a conversation. And here we go. Now that I created a certain difference in my mind between like just small talk, which sometimes could be mundane, boring, and just I don't know, just like draining, right? That social places are only interesting if there's something interesting to kind of like do or talk about or just listen to people that are interesting. It kind of like becomes an activity. So we're imagining a conversation that expands is a conversation that dives into more detail, I guess. But like you know, diving into detail isn't really a linear line. It's just kind of like expanding on the different aspects that connect to the same point that has the conversation running around it. So the reason I say, ah, so it's a conversation that expands versus a conversation that solidifies something. No, it's is. I want to say is, but I think what's written is versus. Ah, so here I might have actually made a mistake because, or it makes more sense to me right now, is the conversation that expands is a conversation that solidifies something. But the expansion itself isn't articulating what it's solidifying. There are conversations where you're purely just kind of like trying to understand something and it becomes a talk from another person. Them genuinely kind of like establishing points, rules, destructuring in their heads something for you to understand. But I feel it's the same. It's basically the conversation itself is expanding and it's allowing other people to kind of like link up to the reference points that they understand in order to reach the point that the conversation is kind of circling around. And I feel like that's the solidification because like I actually create the route to the point. Isn't that how we think, by the way? Because like all these words that in your head are connected differently to different topics. And what happens is basically they kind of like link together to that's where like a true understanding of something allows you to build on top of the words that you know, given the actual like thought that or the concept that you had in mind or the point that you have that you want to like express. And so a conversation that expands is basically like one that's reaching out to all the things that could connect to it or are connect could connect to the point or are connected to the point. And these are the things that basically create points of reference for other people within the conversation or just listening, whatever, not really like in the conversation. So the truth is there's a sharing of reference points, or at the very least, this is how I see it, this is how I see it, or this is how I look at it, and this is how I look at it. And this engagement, okay, so what is it building this engagement? Because like I'm visualizing it as points, but these points could be visualized because like I'm really connecting it from a chart's perspective, which I think is very mechanical. Is there any other way to connect it? All right, so like if I'm thinking of a point as a road, then every basically reference point is one of those like a tree or a curve or a specific building somewhere or a specific site to see. And there are many ways. All roads lead to Rome was once said because like the center of Rome expanded the road system into Europe and all that stuff. So basically, imagine like the points that we're trying to make or the conversation is about literally has roads reaching to it. And everyone has to establish their own roads or at the very least be familiar with the roads in order to be able to like get to this point for it to become like either understandable or rejectable. Well, either way, when you understand it, you either accept it, acceptable or rejectable. So I either accept this point or I reject it. That's not what we're talking about right now. You understand it enough to reject it, or you understand it enough to accept it. Rejection and acceptance are based on why this point matters to me, because a lot of people kind of like hold true certain values that don't necessarily like harmonize with different things. And we're not judging people's values here, man. Choose whatever the fuck you want, right? To each his own. Literally, as long as you understand why you're saying no to something or you're saying yes to something, I think that's ultimately a superpower. Even when people kind of like are saying yes to the wrong things, or at the very least, because I can't say wrong, right? Because from my perspective, if I say wrong, that means I'm judging something as wrong. But I understand why, for me, it's not really something I would say yes to. So as long as we're able to understand that, and I think that's where kind of like the points that the point that a conversation makes allows the experience of like finding the road to it through your thoughts, through your understanding, through the different points, reference points that each individual has. So it's actually a good example, our roads to Rome. So for that, like every other conversation that's happening, if it's expanding, then what it's doing basically, it's reaching out to different reference points. And these reference points are basically the ones that are used by other people in order to connect it, or by you to realize how far the connections go. Because ultimately, it's solidifying these roads, the roadmap in your mind, that allows you to kind of like engage with other things and to basically like realize these reference points that you might have subconsciously and maybe even apply them to different things. So like basically all your mind starts being connected to the things that you love, that that you care about, and realize how they also could connect to things that you don't care about. And that kind of like shows you roads to avoid in your train of thought and roads to look out for and to get excited and reference points to kind of like move in different directions. It's funny. Honestly, man, who listens to this shit? It's like random notes that I take. But for me, they actually kind of like turn into like profound insights on how my moods of the day are actually like being established. Or at the very least, what are the triggers of this world that kind of gets in me? And here, I wonder what are the things that other people kind of like see, because like life is perspective, right? And so almost all conversations kind of have each individual's perspective on it. And if I'm not mistaken, like as the conversation expands, you get to understand these perspectives as well, because you get to see the values they actually like cling on to by the reference points that they use. So it not only solidifies something with you and with the other person, it also solidifies your understanding of the other person and the other way around. I think we scientifically drew how conversations work in this video. I am talking nonsense, but I love it. It's a video.